Here, I've thrown all my javelins. I have other hand-to-hand combat weapons I can use, like the sax that we just talked about, or the axe, which is also in my belt. You're going to hear more about in just a little while. Great. Any questions about spears? Yes.
Why do spears have to have sharp points on the side?
Why does it have to have the sharp edges?
Yeah, on the side.
Yeah, well, it just helps it as a penetrating weapon. It will cut better than if it's not sharpened. Any other questions? Yes.
Is there a reason you don't have anything on the opposite end?
The reason what?
Is there a reason you don't have anything on the opposite end of your spear?
It was just a use of metal. What he's talking about is on a lot of spears, you'll see a counterweight on the other end. And it can also be used, in fact, as a point, so you can use the spear in both directions. There isn't a lot of evidence that the Vikings had spears of that type. They mostly had just a single pointed spear. My guess is it's because iron was a very valuable commodity. And you can arm twice many warriors if you're not putting a point on both ends. Anything else? Yes.
Spear we use as like a staff as well, or is it?
Yeah. Actually, one of the oldest. That's a really good question. I meant to mention that. One of the oldest and most effective combat weapons. Forget about this point. Is the staff. I can do a lot of things with the staff if I'm skilled that can keep an opponent at bay, or even if I hit him hard enough, kill him or injure him. So yeah, you can use it in that way as well. Anything else? All right, well, I'll turn it over to our intrepid archer to tell you about Viking Age archery.
A bow and arrow was something that probably most Viking households had because it was a weapon that could be used to gather game and food. But it also had a very, very good military applications. The main application of an arrow, bow and arrow, is I do not have to get within arm's reach of a shield wall or an opponent. I can be off 50, 60 yards and fire an arrow into them. The technique for engaging an enemy, especially with shields, was not to stand back and fire at them directly. It was to be farther off and lob the arrows into them. So to launch them up and have the arrows come down vertically. This could be defended against by raising one's shield up, but it leaves the body vulnerable. Arrows came, and a number of different types of arrow heads were made. There was the usual, what would be today the broadhead, or a hunting arrow, which was a good cutter and penetrator of tissue. We would use it in hunting. We would also use an arrow like that against, say, a soldier who was mounted on a horse. You would not engage a soldier, you would engage the horse, which would probably stumble, toss the rider, then you could deal with the rider on the ground, who may or may not have broken an arm or a leg, but they would be injured in each one. The problem with that type of arrowhead is it most likely would not penetrate chainmail, because it's a cutting implement. So another type of arrowhead was devised. I don't have a sample with me directly, but if you just think of this as a big arrow, the arrows came with a sharp conical point, and this point could penetrate chainmail. It was small enough to slip in between the rings. There's enough power in the arrow to completely push the rings apart. Are there any questions? Yes.
Were Vikings proficient in archery and also in hand, or did they usually?
I was, because I'm an archer, I'm also the lower class of Viking. I was not wealthy, and I could not afford chainmail. I probably could not have afforded this helmet, but scavenging from the dead works, so I got it. And forgetting the question again.
So I was just wondering if Vikings were trained to be proficient in multiple weapons, not just like for instance a spear, but also combat with the
chances are I would probably not be proficient with a sword because I never had access to a sword. Those are things that a wealthy man would have. I try to avoid hand-to-hand combat because I'm unarmored. The only weapon I have for my defense would be a sax again, and this is as a sort of a last-ditch method. There was another question?
I heard that later on, instead of saxes, you carry dirks. What would be the difference?
The difference between a sax and a dirk? A sax is a single-edge knife. They came in many different shapes and sizes, from small eating utensils to some which were several feet long. This is a cutting weapon. It's a slashing and stabbing weapon. A dirk is a dagger, and a dagger is meant as just a stabbing weapon only. So a dirk that you would carry in say a boot or a shoe, which you see a lot of the Scots have, that was a last-ditch weapon that they could. It was a backup weapon, essentially.
Would they also use it to use a sax, just like skinning game, something like that?
Say again?
Would they also use it like a sax, just to use it to skin game?
It was an overall utility. It was a utility knife. It was a style of knife that was used in many northern European cultures, not just Vikings, but also the German tribes, the Saxons, which Saxon comes from. It was just a style of knife. It's actually, even today, just as I noticed several weeks ago, if you look at some of your high-end kitchen knives, chef's knives, if you will, they're very similar to this. It's often a straight parallel blade that just drops off at the tip. So the sax really is still around in just slightly different guises. It's just a utility knife. Now there were other weapons which were used, aside from the bow and arrow and spears, and that is the axe. So now Richard will tell you this.
Vikings form the shield wall. A simple farm implement? Yes, it was. You could chop a tree down, you could fashion a house, you could build a ship with a tool like this. But this was also one of the deadliest weapons. This was one of the big sticks of the Viking age. This, when used properly, was very effective against this type of formation in the field. Notice the reach. Look at the size of the weapon. You can imagine the mass and the force which a blow could be delivered with this. Working in tandem with another man with an axe. You can come up, you can reach out, hook a shield, pull it down. The other man steps forward, you see the results. Very, very effective. This could crush a helmet, it could shatter a shield. Used against a mounted warrior, you could cut the legs out from under a horse. You could bring a man down who was riding down upon you with a weapon like this. I could work behind a shield wall. Reaching over, I've got the reach. Again, a devastating weapon designed to inflict massive damage on your opponent.
Yes, again.
This is me in Pepper Smash right here.
Of course you have a question.
When you're operating behind a shield wall and you're reaching over, isn't there a real danger of getting your axe stuck in the other person's head?
Well, it's quite possible in a battle anything can happen, but your chances of inflicting damage on somebody by working over and around the flank on a shield wall were still very good. This was a great weapon with a tremendous amount of force behind it, and if even a near miss was probably going to do a lot of damage. You could break bones, you could bring a man down, wound him. If you can imagine, this is actually one of the smaller Dane axes. They've had bigger heads than this on them and even longer shafts. There's also accounts given in history where a single man could defend an entire position like a bridge for a long period of time. withstanding an attack of many warriors. A man who would go berserk, a berserker type, handling a weapon like this, personally, I really wouldn't want to face him. One thing I'd just like to end this demonstration with is the idea that why Vikings? Why do we still know who the Viking warrior was? Why do we still pay attention? Why are they different? Their enemies, the people they fought in England, in France, Spain, Africa, had weapons much like these. The Danax, a little different, but the difference was the Vikings had the best ships in the world. And that's not an exaggeration. They could go deep up rivers. They could carry their ships across land to the next river and continue on. Those ships allowed us to actually attack wherever we chose, to pick usually a peninsula to set up a temporary war base, make the raids, retreat back to the peninsula, and escape with no one being able to mount a defense. Those ships could move much faster than any walking army, and even could move 3 times faster than a mounted army. So the main thing was the Vikings struck where they wanted to, when they wanted to, fought the battles they chose, and could retreat. And we usually won. Thank you.